Hat sind, wenn's kehrt die Rie mir sich zurück allein, ist mir ein Ries die Augen öffnen und sehen, mit jedem Glied da, als ist mein Herz herabgefallen, wie ein Spiegel auf ein Stein, und mit der Klung von Bruch auf Sticker sich zu splittert. Gewiss ist euch jeder Bruchstück nicht befreit zu sein an jedes wegen mir, bis meine letzte 4 bescherte Ehren. So tritt mich noch nicht du, o Richter meiner Zeit, bis ich will absuchen in euch Schott die zerspritzte Teeren. Ihr will sie aufkleiden verpufen, eins zu eins beheften sie benannt, bis Blut den Finger sich verstochen, Gotsch, wir soll sie kunzig nicht zu neu kleppen, als eins, welch in dem sich ständig sind verkrippelt und zerbrochen. Stets der kommt zu mir in Treue, der Bescheid. In Weh von Überschmelz begreif ich flammig, der Pein, von welchen Sensach im Spiegel ganzer Heid, was ist in Bruchstücker zu seht, auf alle Schäfe jammer. Peretz Markisch.
Shmuel Halkin, a poet, 1897-1960.
Leon Talmy, a translator, 1893-1952.
Emilia Kuman, an editor, 1905-1952.
Lena Stern, a scientist, 1875-1968.
Solomon Bregman, a government official, 1895-1953.
Boris Shmelyovich, director of Moscow's leading hospital, 1892-1952.
Solomon Lazovsky, head of the Soviet Information Bureau, 1878-1952.
Joseph Yusufovich, a historian, 1890-1952.
Ilya Wattenberg, a journalist, 1887-1952.
Heike Wattenberg-Ostrovskaya, a translator, 1901-1952.
Benjamin Zuska, an actor, 1899-1952.
David Bertelsen, a novelist, 1884-1952.
Itzik Pfeffer, a poet, 1900-1952.
David Hefstein, a poet, 1889-1952.
Peretz Markish, a poet, 1895-1952.
Leib Kvitko, a poet, 1890-1952.
Russia's old regime was brutally anti-Semitic. Every part of it, from the repressive decrees of the Tsars to the murderous pogroms of drunken peasants.
The rise of the Bolsheviks promised Jews a true revolution, a 180-degree turn from the old system to a future of freedom and promise.
Russia's Jews loved it. Most passionately, the Jewish intellectual elite.
For the Yiddish poets, the shtetl, the darkness, the misery, it was all in the past. Things could only get better from here.
Ich bin zugebunden zu meinem größten Feind, der dem, mein Feind, hat mir verschmeckt mit seinen Wurzeln.
The great today and I are one. The oak, my friend, seduced me with its roots.
Ich bin zugebunden zu meinem größten Feind, der Grobeisen, mein Freund, is scharf and erd is feich and saftig.
The great today and I are one. The pickaxe, my friend, is sharp and the earth is juicy.
Is do de zon nicht.
Whether the sun is out or not,
Mir stark der schmeckende Geräuf, wie Behemoths kommen sich zu Neuf.
the fragrant yard where cattle gather invigorates me.
In meine feste Fies, in meine starke Hände, ich wollte ein hinden Ochs den Kopf verwend.
I have sure feet, I have strong arms. I could crush the skull of a young ox.
Leib Kritzel.
The Soviets' plan for the Jews is simple. Melt them into the general population.
And once all the ethnicities wither away, as they must, the only thing left will be workers without ethnicity or nationality, the new Soviet man.
Bolsheviks realized very early on that in order to accomplish this, they would need to manipulate the Jewish masses, both religious and secular, through the language almost all of them spoke at home, Yiddish.
And so the Soviets encouraged new Yiddish writing.
Of course, there were limits. There could be no nostalgia for the old way of life, only condemnation. Nor could there be any biblical imagery be used, not in the atheist USSR.
And new Soviet Yiddish orthography reflected the change. The Yiddish alphabet was cleansed of letters that only occurred in words that came from Old Hebrew, because Hebrew was the language of religion.
Nu, is was as man hat mich gemalet und gepravet wie bei Jiden Abriss. So haben feldische Winden versmaliert meine weiße, verdrimmelte Fies. Dort träumen noch Jiden von Schorn. Jaten bänken noch euch und noch Flaum. 8 Jahre auf Felder und Tolden unter himmlischen, bläuen Jahr. Me kenn mich für a guten und a stillen. Für a Sach ist meine Ehrlichkeit karg. Ich hab keinmal nicht gelegt Katwilden und keinmal nicht gehandelt in Mark. Nu, is was am hat mich gemalet und gepravet wie bei Jiden Abriss. So haben feldische Winden versmaliert meine weiße, verdrimmelte Fies. It's a clever.
In the early 1920s, as the young communist state struggles to survive on its own, it's still possible to leave it, and many do.
Novelist David Bergelson, poet Peretz Markish, poet Leib Gvidko, and poet David Hofstein all leave. They spend several years writing and traveling in Poland, in Germany, in Palestine, and even in the US.
But soon enough, many returned to the USSR, either because they found it hard to make a living elsewhere, or because of their commitment to the new Russia.
By the late 1920s, with the USSR firmly established, things in Russia stabilize, but the screws are slowly, imperceptibly beginning to tighten. Music and literature must now promote socialist thinking. The period of wild experimentation with form in the arts is at an end. Socialist realism takes over.
Art should be understood by workers and peasants.
Art should be realistic and universal.
Art should positively reflect the life of the Soviet Union while being true to the principles of the Communist Party.
Symbolism, modernism, avant-garde. Those are dirty words now.
Because an accusation of having a passive attitude toward reality had serious consequences.
Der Nister, a symbolist, writes,
My earlier writings have aroused strong opposition. Symbolism now has no place in the new Soviet Russia. And as you know, I am, and have always been, a symbolist. Here, one has to turn one's soul upside down.
Peretz Markish, a modernist, writes,
In general, we don't know which world we are in. In this atmosphere of trying to be terribly proletarian and 100% kosher, much falseness, cowardice, and vacillation have manifested themselves, and it is becoming almost impossible to work.
But the writers adjust to the times. They examine their work for deviations.
David Bergelson now makes sure he writes in a realistic style.
Peretz Malkish edits his earlier poems for reprint to reflect ideological corrections.
Led Kritko begins specializing in children's poetry. Later generations of Soviet children know his poems very well.
Анна Ванна, наш отряд, хочет видеть поросят. Мы их не обидим. Поглядим и выйдем.
But of course, Kritko originally wrote it in Yiddish, piglets and all.
Anna, Wanna, Brigadier, even Teufel stahl die Tier, weist die neue Schäne, Chaserlich die Kleine.
Der Kinder, Haberleit, jetzt der doch nicht raschen. Halt doch jetzt die Haselech gerade im Mittel waschen.
Anna, Wanna, Brigadier, even Teufel stahl die Tier, los sie doch ein Glätter, morgen hat sie Fette.
Steht der Kinder, Haberleit. Hat ihr denn vergessen? Sie dürfen doch die Haselech gerade jetzt essen.
Anna, Wanna, Brigadier, even Teufel stahl die Tier, Giecher schon bei Weise, Rose wird sie weiße.
Später, Kinder, Haberleit, stiller, nicht gelaufen. Ich lege weg die Haselech gerade jetzt erschlafen.
Anna, Wanna, Brigadier, Kinder beten sich bei dir.
Scha, Haberimlech, sie schlafen die Haserimlech. Otto ruhen sie sich aus, lass ich sie zu euch heraus.
The deviations are gone, but now Jewishness itself is a problem. Writing anything in Yiddish about Jews could be declared non-proletarian and restricted to a nationalistic point of view.
But how do you write in Yiddish and not be nationalistic? I mean, Yiddish means Jewish. You cannot separate the two. So the writers give up their formalism, they give up using traditional Jewish frames of reference, but they don't give up their language.
In jiddischen Wort, dies ist wild, dies ist mild, dies ist teuer. Is voran a Ruf zu Banayung. Is voran a Rufen der Feier, als Winden, wo's ziehen durch weltische breite Barotten, nicht kennen verblosen sein glühenden Otten. Und Aschen von Tkufes nicht kennen sein Zunter verkreuen, sein munteren Zunter, was hält sich auf Stillkeit von Bläuen. In jiddischen Wort, was es ockerst daraus von die Zwangen, was unruhig sucht sich nach Felder und Steppes, ist voran schon die sichere Ruhe und die Breitkeit von Eppers. Und nicht nur bei heilige Schomren, in Wort bei die Poscheter Hieters hält sich der Anheb von stolze Gesangen von Scheier. In jiddischen Wort, was ist wild, was ist mild, was ist teuer. David Hofstein.
In 1931, as an alternative to the Zionist dream of a new Jewish state, which had been growing in popularity worldwide, the Soviets create a Jewish autonomous region with its capital in Birobidzhan. It's a swamp-ridden land on the far east of Siberia near the Soviet-Chinese border, and it's practically uninhabitable. Still, many optimistic volunteers, including several hundred people from abroad, travel there to drain the swamps, build the houses, and prepare the land for the thousands of Jews who will surely be moving there soon.
Schlaf, mein Kind, vermach die Augen, dunkler werden Berg. Sie sind nobler durchgeflogen, sein sollst du wie er. Sie sind
Music by Raisa Boyanskaya, words by Itzik Pfeffer.
The Birobidzhan project was not particularly successful. Not many people moved there, and many of those who do move back home shortly afterwards. Besides, once the Great Terror of the 1930s begins, a Jewish autonomous region is not most people's priority. The main question now is how to stay alive.
1935, 36, 37, 38, the Great Terror, the Purges. There had been arrests and convictions in the 1920s, but not on this scale.
The newspapers rage that a vast conspiracy has penetrated all levels of Russian life. It was led by the most trusted members of the government. Its goals were to crush the new Soviet state, assassinate Stalin, and restore capitalism.
There are three major trials where the founding fathers of the revolution, Lenin and Stalin's closest friends and co-workers, the cream of the crop of the Bolshevik leadership, are tried. These are called show trials. The accused are forced to stand in a huge courtroom full of dignitaries and international guests and confess for the benefit of newsreel cameras. All are convicted of treason, and all are executed.
At the same time, millions of ordinary citizens are arrested for being enemies of the state, and they're sentenced to hard labor in Soviet prison camps or executed. Some of the most prominent Yiddish writers and critics are caught up in these waves of terror, and they vanish in the purges.
Most of the arrests take place at night. Countless people throughout the country pack a small suitcase and sit up all night, fully dressed, waiting for a knock on the door.
Wir schlafen nicht bei Nacht. Wir liegen still im Herden. Von wannen klingen Reden. Noch weinen Tuppen tritt. A ganze Nacht hat Emets kalte Sterne in unser kalte Finsternis geschieht. Wer weiß, sie wollen des Morgens sich erwarten, zuerst schon heimgekommen in Serei. Hoi, ergens brennen Städt, ergens hurigen Schlachten, in uns wird Sinn gefunden auf dem Schnee.
We don't sleep at night. We lie still and we listen. From where the sounds are heard. For whom they came today. All night the stars that in the sky do glisten, into our darkness cold were thrown in disarray. Who knows if we'll live to see tomorrow, or maybe our turn has come today. Hey, somewhere towns burn, and somewhere men are fighting, and us, the sun might find us lying in the snow.
Ganze Nacht hat man in Finsternis geschossen, in Scheude hat gejuckt auf kalte Wind. A ganze Nacht hat heuch geräuscht und hat gegossen. A ganze Nacht hat Leib in Wartenisch gebrennt.
All night in darkness shots rang out. The shadows were dancing on the walls. All night it rustled and it sloshed, it gurgled. All night my body burned while waiting for the dawn. Leib Kvitko.
There were waves of oppression against Jewish culture, too. By 1939, all the Jewish educational institutions are closed. All Yiddish newspapers are closed. And the leaders of the few remaining yeshivas, which had long since gone underground, are hunted down, captured, and executed.
But in the same year of 1939, Solomon Michaels, director of Moscow's Gazette Yiddish Theater, and the poet Peretz Markish received the Order of Lenin, the highest honor in the USSR. Leib Kvitko receives the Order of the Red Banner of Labor. The poets David Hofstein, Shmuel Halkin, and Itzik Pfeffer all received the Order of Honor. One hand giveth, and the other hand taketh away.
And in 1939, there is a large gathering to celebrate the 80th birthday of Sholem Aleichem, with all of the major Yiddish writers and cultural figures present.
Having attended this event will later come back to haunt some of them.
Also in 1939, the Soviet Union signs its infamous pact with Nazi Germany. Stalin and Hitler, now allies, divide Eastern Europe between them.
On September 1st, Germany invades Poland from the west. 2 weeks later, the Soviets invade Poland from the east. But the Jews on the Soviet part of Poland remain safe from the Nazis. They are protected by the pact.
Und siehst du in Drößen von Weiber a Rädel, ma arbeit die Socken in Schotten von Sädel, me schuschket sich, eine zu zweiter gebeugen, und treurige Schottens verstellen die Augen. Sei wissen, mein Bruder, und du Durchgeher, es wird etwas geschehen, es wird etwas geschehen. Ein nevidischer Geist ist zugossen in weibische Herzen. Sie gucken in sie wie in Urim Vetumim. Sie fühlen das Sod und sie wissen sein Sinnen der vielen Vermeierung, die Liebe und Sinne. Sie schuscheln sich, schuscheln. Du guckst sich herum, du suchst Chotscha Simen von dem, wo sie murmeln. Du suchst und du schreckst sich und wirst schier Meschuge und wirst mit der tjochkende Herz kaum an Brunnen. Ich rot dir, mein Bruder, im Gas dann nicht gehen. Es wird etwas geschehen. Es wird etwas geschehen. Leib Kvitko.
On June 22nd, 1941, Hitler breaks the pact and attacks the USSR. Stalin is caught by surprise. The Red Army is unprepared, and the Germans swiftly move through the western part of the Soviet Union. 6 days later, they are in Minsk. 3 months later, they are in Kiev. And everywhere they go, there are mass murders of the Soviet Jewish population.
The USSR quickly mobilizes. The government forms several anti-fascist committees to rally foreign opinion in the fight against Nazi Germany and to spearhead fundraising efforts in the West. There are 5 of them: the Women's Anti-Fascist Committee, the Youth Anti-Fascist Committee, the Scientists Anti-Fascist Committee, the Slavs Anti-Fascist Committee, and the most prominent and the most successful of them, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee.
All 5 committees are steered by Solomon Lazovsky, the deputy chairman of Soviet Information Bureau, whose task is to control the spread of information about the war both within the country and beyond. An old Bolshevik, a member of the Communist Party since 1904, Lazovsky was a major figure in the Soviet government who had somehow managed to survive the purges of the 1930s.
In March 1942, the creation of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee is officially announced. It is headed by theater director Solomon Michoels.
For the first time in years, there is a Soviet organization specifically concerned with Jews. But of course, its concern is not Jews in the USSR. Its objective is to get Jews abroad to support the Soviet war effort.
There are 2 parts to the committee.
The decorative part, famous names: Soviet Jewish musicians, scientists, film directors, journalists, people whose names would attract the public's attention.
And the working part, the people who would meet and actually do the job.
The members of the committee included
Shmuel Halkin, a poet.
Leon Talmy, a translator.
Emilia Tuman, an editor,
Lina Stern, a scientist.
Solomon Bregman, a government official.
Boris Shmelyovich, director of Moscow's leading hospital.
Solomon Lazovsky, head of the Soviet Information Bureau,
Joseph Yusufovich, a historian.
Ilya Wattenberg, a journalist,
Heike Wattenberg-Ostrovskaya, a translator.
Benjamin Zuskin, an actor.
David Berdelson, a novelist.
Itzik Pfeffer, a poet.
David Hofstein, a poet,
Peretz Markish, a poet.
Leib Kvitko, a poet.
The Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee publishes its own newspaper, Einigkeit, Unity. It first appears in June of 1942. It is the only Yiddish newspaper in the USSR at this time.
Though most copies are sent abroad, some do reach the Soviet Jewish public. Einigkeit featured stories about Jewish soldiers in the Red Army and about Jewish suffering in the Nazi-occupied territories. In 1943, a Jewish captain writes to Einigkeit from the front.
My parents have recently sent me the Einigkeit. This was an extraordinary event for us. The Jewish soldiers snatched it from each other.
Betrug. Wat dan Berlin geteilt sich mit Leibsack, zurückgeschleppt von Holstein. In der Nacht, geräuscht mit Wein von aller Kärtes von Europa, den Pisk verstoppt mit reichem Fressgeflecht. Die Nacht, die heftige Nacht von mörderische Gobeln, die Jahre Nacht von Mord, von Teutz der Volk, Europas Hauptstadt, Kochlen, halb der Wogen, in Ghettos, sanken Rechten von Erfolg. Wir machten Länder frei von Menschen von der neuen Saison, deren wilde Wald war Jägersbläus. Europa steht, bestimmen sie für deutsche Beudes. In no Berlin für Chaschkes scheint aus. In Ort ist im Prinzip ein Sindel ausgewachsen beim Lehrer Plotkin. Das 5. Kind. In Ort dem Jüngel wachsen Fliegel auf der Achsel. A Winderkraft im Blitz seins Rind. In der Lehrer Sindel kriegt den Kuppel zu fliehen aus lächen Berliner Schein. Danach, in Kopf der Säuerstoff, in Heich, trugt sich durch Himmelkelt und schwimmt in Säunes Land herein. Ort räuscht im Licht Berlin, die Plätze von der Zirche. Ort liegt Berlin, du, in der Plotkins Fies. Lässt sich niedere Karuzien in Zirche, in Pazew geht mit Pazew. Ries nach Ries, als soll geschwungen werden mit brennenden Geheimen, mit aller Machismus, die trugs mit sich, nicht scheinen, wird kein Jund, nicht scheinen, eier Grewitz, kommt's man bei ihnen, sie soll's gelöschen Licht, bei Menschens lebendigen Leib, dem Ude, Tränen ist eier Gust, ist naht, heu bei euch gefällt, ist naht und naht, wenn ihr von Eck bis Eck wird brennen, erst dann wird aufleuchten die freie Welt. In Mischeplock ist von Flieh zurückgekommen Fahrtug, durchgeweckte Bissenbein. In Ede noch dem Flieherpelz abgenommen, unmutentin, legt sich auf dem Stein. Lebt Quidco.
In May 1943, with the war raging, the Soviet government decides to send representatives of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee on a 9-month fundraising tour, with stops in the US, Canada, Mexico, and Great Britain.
There are many candidates for the trip, but in the end they settled on Solomon Mikhails, who was the best-known Soviet Jew outside the USSR. Mikhails had never joined the Communist Party, but his 1935 production of King Lear in Yiddish made him world famous. Accompanying him is poet Itzik Pfeffer, member of the Communist Party since 1919 and a fellow member of the committee.
But Pfeffer's most important qualification for the trip was his relationship with the NKVD, the secret police, where he was well established as an informer. The NKVD did not trust Mikhails and wanted someone along to report on his activities.
Besides raising funds, the purpose of the tour was to get American Jews to pressure the US government to open a second front in Europe. The Allies at this time were fighting in North Africa and the Pacific, But in Europe, the Russians still faced Germany alone. Whether 2 Jews from the Soviet Union could achieve such a goal is doubtful, but that does seem to have been the hope.
In July of 1943, a rally is held at the Polo Grounds in New York City. 47,000 people show up. Mayor LaGuardia speaks, Eddie Cantor performs. So does Paul Robeson, an African-American actor and singer who had first visited Russia in 1934 and is very sympathetic to the Soviet cause.
During their visit, Pfeffer and Michoels meet with many American officials.
They also meet with Charlie Chaplin. They meet with Albert Einstein. They meet with Marc Chagall.
The 9-month trip raises a fortune, the equivalent of over $500 million in today's dollars. But all the international connections that were made by Michoels and Pfeffer will come back to haunt them later on.
As the tide of World War II turns, the Germans are pushed back and Soviet cities are liberated one by one. The displaced population slowly begins returning home, but Soviet Jews who are able to return to their homes find them occupied by strangers, and local authorities are reluctant to provide any help.
There is also widespread anti-Semitism in the country toward the end of the war. There was a popular saying at the time that Jews didn't fight in the war, that they were living it up in the rear, in the east of the country, in Tashkent. But over 500,000 Soviet Jews did serve in the Red Army. And Jewish soldiers who fought heroically were nevertheless routinely omitted from lists of soldiers recommended for decorations.
Soviet Jews who are not at the front keep turning for help to their only national institution, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, led by the man called the leading Jew of the Soviet Union, Solomon Michoels. Michoels is so well known that letters addressed Moscow Michoels reach him with no difficulty. People sit in his waiting room at the theater at all hours of the day or night. Some need money, some need a place to stay. People come from all over the USSR to the one person they think might be able to help them, Michoels.
Perhaps to alleviate the problems of the returning Jewish population, the committee sends a letter to Stalin about the possible creation of a Jewish Soviet Socialist Republic in the Crimea.
The idea of a Jewish settlement in the Crimea is not new. It had been in the air since the 1920s, when dozens of collective farms, mostly organized in Yiddish, were founded there.
Although there is no acknowledgement of the letter being received at the time, later events would suggest that somebody did indeed read it.
On May 8th, 1945, the war in Europe ends. The other anti-fascist committees are disbanded. There's no reason for them to continue. But the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee is allowed to go on.
One of their main post-war projects is to complete the gathering of the information for the Black Book.
Begun in 1944, the Black Book was to be a collaboration between the committee and American Jewish sources. It would contain detailed descriptions of Nazi atrocities throughout the USSR, along with details of Jewish participation in anti-Nazi resistance movements. There were to be 2 editions, one published in the USSR and one in the United States.
Misha Alexandrovich, a famous Soviet concert singer, remembers the mood of the time.
In Jahr bald nach der Milchome, im 46. Jahr, hat man mich eingeladen zu der Regierung. Man hat mich gebeten, ich soll davnen Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in Moskwa Chorschul. Sie gewähnen, weißt du, sehr nötig zu überzeugen die meire Welt, als die Beschuldigungen, als die Religie wird verfolgt in Russland, ist erliegen. Und seht ihr, ein berühmter, beliebter Künstler hat gewollt davnen beim Omid, haben wir nicht dagegen. Zu dem Zweck hat man eingeladen die ganze Presse von der ganzen Welt, euch alle diplomatische Korpusen, seien gewesen euch die sowjetische Größe Führers zum Davnen, wie Molotovs Freu, und große Generalen und sehr Mischproches. Man hat es filmiert. Man hat es dann noch übergegeben in die Radios von der Welt, in alle Zeitungen und Journalen, wie 20.000 Jiden in Thalesem und Jarmulkes seien gestanden, leben Mosberg Hochschule, als haben nicht gekannt da reingehen, in ein wenig. Und wir Jiden darfen frei, und es steht der berühmte Singer und darf.
And Jews from all over the country are still writing and calling and asking the committee for all kinds of help. The committee constantly debates whether they're overstepping their authority by attempting to help these people, but they won't abandon their fellow Jews.
On November 29, 1947, at the United Nations, Soviet Ambassador Andrei Gromyko unexpectedly votes to support the creation of a Jewish state. Several days later, Solomon Michoels and actor Benjamin Zuskin perform a scene from the play The Travels of Benjamin III at a literary evening. The play is about two Jews who leave their shtetl and head for the Promised Land. At the end of the performance, Michoels says,
Benjamin left to look for the Promised Land and asked a villager he met along the way how to get to Eretz Yisrael. And right here, not very long ago, Comrade Gromyko has answered this question.
there was a 10-minute ovation. The next day, a recording of the entire event was broadcast on the radio, but without Michoel's comment about Israel. It's a bad sign, he said.
Michoels is unexpectedly sent to Minsk to review a play for the upcoming Stalin Prize competition. He is reluctant to go, but he cannot refuse.
In his Minsk hotel room, he gets a phone call from someone claiming to be an old friend, and he goes out to meet that person.
Michoel's body is found in the snow.
Solomon Michoels was the leader of the Soviet Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, and in January 1948, he becomes the first of its members to be murdered.
May 1948. The State of Israel is created. For reasons of geopolitics, which would change very quickly, the USSR is the first country to officially recognize the new nation.
The Einigkeit newspaper receives thousands of congratulatory letters from Jews all over the country. The editors ask the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for permission to print some of them. That permission is denied.
This letter was sent from Odessa directly to Israel.
We shall come to you to rebuild shoulder to shoulder with you the ruins of our holy land, to fight for our freedom and to sacrifice our lives on its altar. This is not the dream of one individual, but the desire of most of our people here.
This letter, like all mail headed out of the Soviet Union, is almost certainly read by the secret police.
It was usual in the Soviet Union to explain foreign policy issues to the public by holding lectures in large meeting halls.
A properly authorized speaker would explain what was happening, where, what the party's official position was, and what the people's attitude toward the event should be. And there was always a question and answer session afterwards. For the lectures on the creation of the State of Israel, the halls are packed. At every question and answer session, Soviet Jews want to know whether it would be possible to travel to Israel, whether the USSR would be sending a brigade to help Israel fight their fascist enemies, just as the USSR had done 12 years earlier in Spain, and how they might join that brigade. And when they don't get answers, They write to the Ministry of Defense, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and of course, to the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee.
There were so many letters that Itzik Pfeffer asked the Ministry of the Interior what they should do with them. He is told to make a list of the names of the people who sent them. He does.
On the first day of Rosh Hashanah 1948, a huge crowd of Jews mobs the Moscow Choral Synagogue.
The synagogue had again asked Misha Alexandrovich to be the cantor for the Rosh Hashanah services. He wants to do it, but he's told by the Ministry of Culture it is inappropriate for an honored artist of the USSR and a Stalin Prize laureate to sing at a synagogue.
The people mobbing the synagogue this time are not there to pray. The huge turnout in 1946 was an exception. No, they are there to catch a glimpse of Israel's first representative to the USSR, Golda Meir, later Golda Meir, who had just arrived.
A crowd of close to 50,000 people was waiting for us. For a minute, I couldn't grasp what had happened, or even who they were. And then it dawned on me. They had come, these good, brave Jews, in order to demonstrate their sense of kinship and to celebrate the establishment of the State of Israel.
This is the largest gathering of Jews in the 30-year history of the Soviet Union. They've come to celebrate Israel together.
And it becomes clear to the regime that the original Soviet plan of gradually eliminating the Jews' ethnic identity has failed.
The rhetoric about the war changes. Now, even talking about Jewish heroism and Jewish suffering is taboo. All discussion of the war must celebrate the unity of the great Soviet people, so it is Soviet heroism and Soviet suffering.
The tone of articles about Israel in the Soviet press changes from friendly to hostile.
Once Israel begins engaging with the US and Great Britain, it is no longer a young, new Jewish state or a free, sovereign Jewish state.
It is now a bourgeois launching pad for US imperialistic aggression.
Acting on a direct order from Stalin, a well-known Jewish journalist writes in a front-page Pravda article,
Is there any reason why Soviet people should expect the bourgeoisie of Israel to have more scruples and display greater foresight than the bourgeoisie of France or Italy? Hardly. The future of Jewish workers of all countries is bound up with the future of progress, with the future of socialism. I believe that the working people of the State of Israel who do not share the mysticism of the Zionists are now looking northward to the Soviet Union, which is marching in the vanguard of mankind towards a better future.
A wave of anti-Jewish sentiment is about to begin in earnest.
Wie viel is beschert zu leben, bis im treuerigen Sof? Wie viel brennen's uns gegeben? Lass mir nehmen noch a Kos. Sich verlassen auf die Sterne. Sei zum guten Wellen kehren.
How much time is left until the bitter end? How much time is left for grieving? Fill your glass with wine. Let's lift our faces to the stars, and may our destiny be done. The last poem written by Peretz Markish, 1948.
things start to deteriorate in the fall. In September of 1948, David Hofstein is the first member of the Anti-Fascist Committee to be arrested.
In November of 1948, the Yiddish publishing house Der Emes, The Truth, is closed. The Soviet edition of the Black Book is about to go to press. Instead, the printing plates are smashed and the manuscript is confiscated.
Also in November, the Soviet Council of Ministers officially disbands the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. Ironically, the written decision ends with no arrests should be made at this time.
On December 24th, 1948, both Itzik Pfeffer and Benjamin Zuskin are arrested.
Zuskin had been forced to take over Michoil's job as the head of the Gosset Yiddish Theater. A highly strung man, 10 months later, he checks himself into a hospital. He's suffering from nervous exhaustion. While he is lying in a clean bed in an induced sleep, NKVD agents come in and carry him out on a stretcher. He wakes up in the Lubyanka prison.
On January 7th, 1949, Peretz Markish is arrested.
On January 22nd, 1949, Leib Kvitko was arrested.
By the end of the month, 15 of the members of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee are in prison.
In the months following, hundreds of other people associated with the committee are arrested as well.
With so many major figures arrested and imprisoned, it seems that the ground is being laid for a new show trial, like the ones in the 1930s, but this time all the defendants would be Jews.
Нет, милый друг, не свидится нам. Дверь мою холод сковал по углам, и вырваться трудно, поверь мне, и ты не являйся сегодня, мой друг. Гостят у меня тишина и забвенье, и в сердце от горьких предчувствий испуг. Мы встретимся завтра, а может быть позже, когда засверкает на листьях роса, когда засияет в окне день погожий, и солнце заглянет в глаза. Придешь и развеешь ты тяжкие думы, и дверь распахнется в разбуженный сад, и будет мой голос веселым и юным, и нежностью будет лучиться мой взгляд. Нет, милый друг, не являйся теперь, холодом лютым закована дверь.
That was a Russian translation of the last poem by Leib Kvitko. The original Yiddish, it seems, has vanished.
By 1949, anyone who had been in any way exposed to Western ideas was in danger.
All of the international connections that Itzik Pfeffer had made on his wartime tour with Michoils, every letter that members of the committee wrote or received from abroad became a liability.
In June of 1949, actor and singer Paul Robeson comes to Moscow again to give a concert. He asks to see his friend, the poet Itzik Pfeffer. At first, the officials say, Pfeffer's on vacation, he's not available. Robeson, who is devoted to the USSR but is no fool, insists on seeing his friend Itzik Pfeffer. The officials deliberate, and Pfeffer is plucked out of prison and brought to Robeson's hotel room.
He is missing teeth. His clothes are now too big for him. His hands are shaking. According to Robeson, Pfeffer indicates that the room is bugged, and they talk about unimportant things. Later at the concert, Robeson sings the Jewish partisan anthem, Zognit Kenmo, in Yiddish, as a tribute to his friends, Itzik Pfeffer and Solomon Michoils.
But after his meeting with Robeson, Pfeffer is taken back to his cell.
All of the defendants languish in prison for months.
All of the defendants are beaten and tortured.
All but one signed confessions.
After the multiple beatings that I was subjected to, I was ready to confess that I was the Pope's nephew and was acting on his direct personal orders.
Joseph Yusefovich, historian.
But if this was planned to be a repeat of the 1930s show trials, with prominent figures standing in front of newsreel cameras in a courtroom full of foreign guests confessing to outrageous crimes of which they were actually innocent, then the Soviets were in for a great embarrassment.
I waited for this trial with great impatience. I had been accused of horrible things, and I didn't want to die before I told the truth.
Lena Stern, scientist.
I don't care if I live. For me, staying in prison is more horrible than dying. I told the investigator I wanted only one thing, to live to reach the minute when I would face the court and tell the whole truth.
Benjamin Zuskin, an actor.
Despite a year of beatings and interrogations, the case is not brought to trial, but the defendants remain in prison.
Later that year, Benjamin Zuskin, Solomon Lozovsky, and Joseph Yusefovich retract their coerced confessions, and still they remain in prison.
In July 1951, Viktor Abakumov, the Minister of State Security who was in charge of the case, is himself arrested and imprisoned.
So are most of the interrogators.
Abakumov's replacement, Mikhail Rumin, starts preparing a new case. Earlier, the plan had been to charge the defendants with spying and promoting bourgeois nationalism, and planning to establish a Jewish autonomous republic in the Crimea.
But now, Rumin, playing up to Stalin's paranoia, decides to portray the committee as the terrorist center of a Jewish conspiracy whose grasp reaches all the way up to Stalin's inner circle. The new charge will, of course, require a new investigation.
In March of 1952, the new case against the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, with 42 volumes of evidence, is finished. The indictment is prepared and sent to the Military Collegium of the USSR Supreme Court, urging that all of the defendants be executed.
Except for Lina Stern. Lina Stern is an important scientist, so only 10 years of Siberian exile for her.
Two other defendants will not appear at the trial. Solomon Bregman, a Soviet government official, falls into a coma while in prison. He will not recover. He dies 6 months later in the prison hospital.
The other, poet and playwright Shmuel Halkin, suffers a heart attack while in prison. He spends a year and a half in a prison hospital. His case is then tried separately from the committee's, and he survives his light sentence, 5 years in a Siberian labor camp.
He will live until 1960 with, as the poet Itzik Mangel put it, a broken heart and a torn-out tongue.
So the sentences are decided in advance of any trial. Nevertheless, a trial of sorts is held in May of 1952.
A copy of the indictment is sent to Stalin, and the trial's held in secret.
There's no audience,
No newsreel cameras,
no reporters,
no defense attorneys.
no prosecutors.
It is not a show trial.
So why do it at all? If it were going to be kept secret, why not just shoot them in the prison basement? Why go on tormenting them? Why go through this sham of a trial? But to this day, nobody can answer that question.
The 3 judges, the stenographers, and the 13 remaining defendants spend the next 2.5 months in a conference room in Lubyanka prison.
Solomon Lozovsky.
You've studied these 42 volumes of evidence better than me. Didn't you notice that all of the accused say the same things in the exact same words? The people who stand accused here all come from different backgrounds, different levels of education, different status in society. So someone made up these accusations and confessions. Was it the accused? I don't think so. Which means that it was the investigators. Otherwise, how could different people confess with the same words?
Citizen Bergelson, the committee's appeal to world Jewry during the war calls upon every Jew to take the following oath. I am a child of the Jewish people. This is a call to unity based on bloodlines alone, is it not?
The appeal speaks to unity in the struggle against fascism.
Do you feel that the Jewish people alone are struggling against fascism?
Well, this was a call from the anti-fascist Jews of the Soviet Union who were appealing to Jews of all countries during the war. There was an expression, brother Jews. Now, I don't see anything wrong with this expression.
Itzhak Pfeffer, for example, in his poem I Am a Jew, constantly emphasizes that he belongs to the Jewish people, and throughout the whole poem, he keeps yelling, I am a Jew.
There cannot be anything criminal in the phrase, I am a Jew. If I approach someone and say, I am a Jew, what is so wrong about that?
Leib Kvitko.
It seems we have switched positions with our interrogators. Normally, they are the ones who accuse the guilty with facts, and I, a poet, create fiction. Here, it's entirely reversed.
Benjamin Zuskin,
How could I allow myself to do something against a country that made a man out of me? Who would I have been? The son of a tailor who dreamed of giving his son an education. And now, I hold the rank of People's Artist of the Russian Federation and Distinguished Artist of the Uzbek Republic. I am a Stalin Prize laureate and an associate professor at the Moscow School of Theatrical Arts. For what purpose would I carry out any activity against the motherland to which I shall be devoted until I draw my last breath?
get to the point.
I do not value my life. All that I want is for you to be convinced that I did not carry out any hostile activity, either in my work at the theater or at the committee.
You saw that in the newspaper Einigkeit, all of the articles were exclusively about Jews. Now, what did you make of the fact that it was all Jews, 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 and nothing about the Soviet man?
The trial, which continued for 2 months, with the defendants continually protesting their innocence, summarily ended in July of 1952. The sentence, which had been decided back in March, 2 months before the trial even started, was pronounced as follows.
The Military Collegium of the Supreme Court of the USSR has sentenced
Leon Talmy,
Emilia Tumen,
Boris Milyovich,
Solomon Lazovsky,
Joseph Yusufovich,
Ilya Vattenberg,
Heike Wattenberg-Ostrovskaya,
Benjamin Zuskin,
David Bergelson,
Itzhak Pfeffer,
David Hofstein,
Peretz Markis,
Leib
to
Kvitko,
the severest measure of punishment for the crimes committed by them jointly, execution by firing squad, and confiscation of all their property.
all of the defendants appeal their sentences.
all of their appeals are denied.
On August 12th, 1952, the sentence is carried out. The 13 defendants are taken out of their cells, taken down to the prison basement, and shot. That is all that is known about the last moments of their lives.
There is not a single reference to the trial in any Soviet newspaper. No mention of any of the defendants. They just vanished, as if they had never existed.
4 months later, members of the families of Peretz Markish, David Bergelson, Benjamin Zuskin, and Leib Kvitko are arrested and sent into remote regions of the USSR. Their property is confiscated.
In the West, there are rumors of Yiddish writers in the Soviet Union disappearing. Howard Fast, an American writer and a member of the Communist Party, is charged with finding out what he can. He meets with the chairman of the Soviet Writers Union, Alexander Fadeev, who assures him that everyone is alive and well and that there is no anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union.
5 months after the massacre, another anti-Semitic show trial is being prepared. On the anniversary of Mikhoil's death, the Soviet press announces that a new and sinister plot has just been uncovered. A group of Kremlin doctors, most of them Jewish, has been arrested for poisoning several high-ranking party officials and planning to kill Comrade Stalin.
The murderers in white coats were American and English spies.
That was proven. They've all confessed.
This brings on a full-scale panic in the country. People stop going to Jewish doctors. Jewish doctors and nurses are fired from their jobs. there are rumors of plans and preparations to send the entire Soviet Jewish population to Siberia to protect them from the righteous wrath of the non-Jews. And just when things seem the darkest,
On March 5th, 1953, Stalin dies.
On April 4th, 1953, Soviet newspapers report that the Jewish doctors who have been accused of planning to murder Stalin are all innocent. This plot was concocted by enemies of the people.
the next day, from the remote village in Kazakhstan to which she and her children had been exiled, Esther Markish writes a letter to the Central Committee.
Respected comrades, I, Lazebnikova Esther Yefimovna, the wife of the well-known poet Peretz Markish, implore you to read this letter and give it due consideration. To this very day, I know absolutely nothing about the fate of my husband, arrested in January 1949. Throughout the long period of the investigation, he was in Moscow, being held in the Ministry of State Security. My attempts to track down his dossier or obtain a copy of the verdict have been to no avail. We beg you, respected comrades, to come to our aid. Look into the fate of Peretz Markish and let us know it, no matter how terrible it may be. Help us to find out where he is and whether he is alive.
And as late as 1955, Boris Polovoy, a Soviet writer, insists to Howard Fast that Lev Kvitko is fine and that they see him every day.
Shortly after Stalin's death, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee case is reopened and reviewed.
In November of 1955, the case is officially dismissed, quote, because there was no substance to the charges against them. All of the victims of August 12th are rehabilitated in secret. Their vindication is not announced publicly. The only people who are informed are the victims' families.
But some of their names begin reappearing in the Soviet press, which, for those who could read between the lines, signaled that those people had been innocent all along.
In the spring of 1956, Khrushchev makes a historic speech at the 20th Party Congress. He reveals many of Stalin's crimes, and numerous carefully buried Soviet secrets begin to crawl out into the sunlight.
That year, the Volksstimme newspaper in Warsaw and the Forwards in New York published the first reports of the massacre of August 12th, 1952.
The Yiddish world is stunned.
Esther Markish, 1956.
We were in the middle of a meeting one day when the telephone rang. A voice on the other end of the line said, "This is the finance department of the KGB calling. We still owe you a little something." What are you referring to? You know as well as I do that you reimbursed me for all the money I sent to my husband. During the years of his incarceration, Markish did not receive a single kopeck of the money I passed on to the administrations of the Lefortovo and Lubyanka prisons. No, you still have something coming to you. For the teeth. What teeth? The gold crowns. I screamed in a voice that was not my own. My friends came rushing out into the hallway and caught me. I'd fainted.
In the West, since the 1960s, August 12th had been commemorated as a tragic date in Jewish cultural history.
The rehabilitation of the Soviet Yiddish writers and the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee is not mentioned publicly in the Soviet Union until 1989, when Izvestia prints an article of a review of the Jewish anti-fascist case with materials from recently opened Soviet archives.
For the first time, the full list of the accused, what they had been accused of, and the fact that they were murdered by their own government appears in print in the USSR.
Russland. Wenn nicht mein Glauben, mein Starker in dir, ich wollte jetzt der anders geteilt. Ich wollte schon gesagt, du hast uns verführt. Verblendet hast uns, jünger Zigeuner.
Teuer ist uns jeder Heb von deiner Hand. Und weitig schwer sie vertrogen. Und wie groß soll nicht sein jetzt der Bruch und die Schand. Wir kommen vor dir sich klagen.
Auf wohin beschweren jetzt Wasser? Auf wohin, zu welche Länder, glückliche Russländer Gassen, in euch, wir werden sich händigen.
Nicht beschert euch gewesen bis heut sehen ins Haus gehen in der wilde Jerische. Letzte, wir gehen in Span, in Staben von eure Kischen.